My question is, I guess I'm a little angry with God.
Yep, good.
And it has to do with children.
Yep.
And him allowing them to suffer because of their own parents' laws of attractions and or spirits overcloaking them when they don't have the free will to make themselves better. And so I understand part of the upside is that they go to Summerland if they die young, which is great. But it doesn't seem like that's God's purpose to send kids directly to Summerland.
Yep.
It's to be on earth, to experience. And yet all these things that they cannot control through their own will, they're being subjected to. And it doesn't feel loving to me.
Okay. Let's first look what happens when we have a child, shall we? I firstly can understand you being... when I say understand, I get why you're angry with God on the subject. When you're angry with God, you just need to start allowing yourself to feel the anger you have with God for a start. When you say because, you need to logically take your train of thought to its conclusion. And you're not doing that, right? Who had the children?
The parents did?
Yeah. So the parent decided to have a child. Did God decide for the parent to have a child?
No.
No, God allowed the procreative ability to occur, but God didn't decide that you as a parent have to have a child. God never decided that. Did God decide upon the parent's condition?
No.
No. The parent has their own ability to exercise their own condition and grow or degrade their own condition through their choices. So can you see, for a start, from a logical perspective, the parent made the decision to have the child, and the parent's condition was also a decision. So if we look at the decisions, one was to have children. The second decision the parent made was to retain its own unloving condition. I'll just scroll everything right here. Condition. In other words, the parent chose to remain in the same unloving condition before it had the child as after it having a child.
That's assumed that the parents knew that they were in that condition.
I can't... see, I don't believe that anybody doesn't know. Well, you think about it, like, how many times... Like, for example, I say smacking a child is a violent act towards a child. The average parent in the USA disagrees with me completely. In fact, I would suggest that 99% of parents in the USA disagree completely with that statement. 70% of them are religious and believe that smacking a child is God's instruction. Right? Now, I can come along and say smacking a child is an unloving act, but the parent's belief to retain the idea or concept that smacking a child is a loving act is the parent's own choice. And they are making that own choice. In fact, they get very angry when you tell them that smacking the child is an unloving act. They get very angry. So that tells me that the parent wants to retain the unloving position, not that it wasn't outside of their choice. Do you follow me?
Yeah, but it's like what you don't know, you don't know. I mean, if a parent doesn't...
How does it feel if I beat you across your legs? If I laid you on the ground, right, and got a stick and beated you across the legs, would you be happy with that decision?
No, but no? I'm just saying that parents, if they believe something, they don't even think that there's another possibility.
Yeah, but even what they think is their responsibility. See, you're trying to take away the responsibility of the parent's choice by saying, oh, but they don't know. But they do. All they've got to do is do one thing, and that is think ethically. All they've got to do is think, as I said in the first century, How would you like to be treated? Then treat other people how you'd like to be treated. Do you like to be beaten with a stick? No. In your country here, you call that assault. If an adult gets a stick and beats you with it, you call that assault. But if an adult gets a child and beats the stick on the child, you call that parenting. Now, there's something wrong. Now, I do not believe that any parent who examines those two particular things from the perspective of what would I like done to me would be able to see the difference. And I'm quite certain that they would be easily able to determine that what I'm saying is true on that particular subject. But the reality is they don't want to. And that's the use of their will. Right? Now, what we want to do, and this is something that we've got to be very careful doing, is we want to blame God, so here's God up here, for what the parent chose to do. That's what we want to do. We want to blame God for what the parent chose. Now, I see some very big logical and also emotional flaws with doing such a thing. From a logical perspective, if God gives the parent free will, then that allows the parent to make its own decisions. But God also has a whole heap of laws that require the responsibility for such decisions to be placed upon the soul of the parent. Does that make sense? So while the parent has the ability to make the decision, they also have the responsibility, from God's perspective, for the outcome. So God does not attribute the damage done to a child to the child. God attributes it to the parent's soul.
But the child suffers.
The child may suffer temporarily, by the way, not permanently. The child may suffer, but even the choice to make the child suffer is made by the parent's decision, not God's. God doesn't want the child to suffer. The parent does. And we, in most Western societies, and in fact most societies on earth, we are not attributing the decisions towards the person who is responsible. And this is one reason why many of us are not getting into our emotions about our upbringing. Because we don't want to attribute the bad things that happened during our childhood to our parents. We don't want to make them responsible for the choices they made. We want to make God responsible for the choices our parents made. Does that make sense? And that in itself is a flawed logical position. The person who is responsible is the person who makes the decision, not anyone else. So, God gave us the gift to be able to procreate. Parents can use that decision to procreate in a loving way, or they can use that gift to procreate in an unloving way. That is their choice. It's like me giving you a knife, and you can use that to cut up your veggies and prepare your meal in a loving way, or you can use it to harm yourself or harm someone else. You can do either. Now, God has done this with almost every gift that God's given us. So God gave us the gift of sexuality, another gift. We can use it in a loving way and experience pleasure, or we can use it in an unloving way and experience a lot of pain. We can even use it in an unloving way and eventually have terrible diseases and die from them. That's how far it can go. And we have the complete choice to take any direction. The complete free will decision rests upon us, our responsibility. Every time we blame God for something that parents do, we are taking the responsibility away from the parents and placing the responsibility on God, who doesn't want the parents to do those things in the first place. That's what we're doing. And we're doing it for an emotional reason. So what could be the emotional reason why we would like to take the responsibility away from the parent and put it back on God? Well, there's only probably one or two real good emotional reasons. One is some of us are parents and we don't want to feel the responsibility ourselves. And the other one is we have a lot of pain from what our parents chose to do and we don't want to feel that pain. So we would like to blame God for the pain that our parents created. That's what we do. But that is just an avoidance of specific emotions. In the end, that's the underlying emotional reason that drives us into blaming God for something that somebody else is responsible for. The reality is the person who makes the decision bears the responsibility. God made this beautiful system where if you make the decision, you bear the responsibility. On earth, all of us try to get away with that. You think in your own culture, and it's the same in our culture in Australia, how many times we try to get away with a certain responsibility of taking a certain action. You know, there's whole teams of lawyers helping people get away with the responsibility of their own actions. You know, we call it defence. It's not defence. It's helping people get away from having to take any responsibility for their choices, in many cases. And we do this all the time because we want to get away with things. We do. If you're honest with yourself, in the course of a day or a few days of your life, think about how many times you want to get away with something that you wouldn't really like anybody else to get away with. Right? So if you're speeding, how many of you speed? Everyone, okay. Pretty close to. So we're speeding and we have an accident. What's the law state under those circumstances here in the USA? Basically, it makes you mostly culpable for the accident, doesn't it? But how many of us want to get away with that? We want to speed and also not take responsibility for the actions that speeding causes. That's what we want to do. We are constantly in avoidance of law. Does that make sense? So the way God has made the universal system is you cannot avoid law. God made this beautiful law-based system, all based on love, and we need to conform with it. But the reality is the majority of us on earth want to get away with it. We want to get away with law. You look at our day-to-day life, we're often trying to get away with it, right? If you think about it, we're often trying to get away with things. And that demonstrates the level of rebellion we have towards law, which is basically an anger, right? An anger towards law. We don't want to be governed by law. This is the thing that caused us to make decisions that are unloving. We don't want to be governed by loving laws. We want to think that what we want should go. But the problem with any unloving law is that it always damages someone else. The problem with any unloving decision we make is that it always damages someone else. Always. And we often don't want to bear the responsibility of that damage because we feel guilty, we feel ashamed, and we feel other emotions that we need to feel, but we choose to avoid those emotions too. And so what we often do with parenting is that we want to avoid the guilt associated with making the decision that then bears certain responsibilities. And so what we do is we come up with, God's to blame for it all. And that helps us personally get away with a whole lot of things that God is going to attribute it to you personally as a parent. But it also helps you get away with the emotions involved in what was done to you by your own parents. In other words, you're willing to forgive your parent as long as you put all the blame on God rather than your parent. Right? And what I'm suggesting is that's not forgiving your parent either. That's just shifting the blame from someone who is responsible to someone who isn't for their actions. And we often want to do that ourselves in our own life as well. We want to often shift the blame away from ourselves onto someone else, someone often who we can't touch and we can't feel and we can't get, someone who's not going to belt us back if we acknowledge it. So in other words, we often want to blame God because we know God's not going to come down and punish us. God's not going to come down and beat us up because of our blame of him. God's not going to do all of those things. So what we finish up doing is we blame God for a lot of things. And we do it for emotional reasons inside of ourselves. I feel God's made a perfect system when it comes to decision and responsibility. We use our will in harmony with God's love. There is never going to be a negative result, ever. If we use our will out of harmony with God's love, there will always be a negative result of which we bear the responsibility. And that's a perfect system. What we have on earth is a very imperfect system. Often I bear the responsibility for something you did, or somebody else bears the responsibility for something you did. It's not very fair, but it often happens like that.